Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Good evening. Good evening, friends. Welcome to Kardec Radio. This is the 6 p.m. daily prayer program. My name's Teresa Castro, and I host the prayer program on Sunday evenings. And I am ever so grateful to be back here with all of you. Welcome, welcome. So, before our prayer, in light of September being Suicide Prevention Month, we are going to have a little discussion about suicide. And Kardec asked the question. He said, why can't we end our life? Why aren't we free to end our suffering? And he does give us his comment, and it is in the Spirit's book. It's the part 4, chapter 1, and it is at the end of the questions that address suicide. So it's after question 957. Hi, John DeRosa. Thank you for signing in. And what Kardec says is that because we have the Spiritist doctrine, that's why we aren't free to end our suffering, that we cannot quit our life. And also, as part of this doctrine, right, we have mediumship, communications with not only the higher order spirits, but also spirits who have already committed suicide and are suffering. And they tell us their experience. And so this is why we know and we learn from them of why it is a crime, it is criminal, it is against the natural laws, the laws of God, to end our life. So what we're going to look at is a case study in this book, Heaven and Hell. And this book, part of the title is Heaven and Hell, or Divine Justice According to Spiritism. And here's a little description of the book. It's a comparative examination of doctrines concerning the passage from corporeal life to spirit life, concerning future punishment and reward, concerning angels and demons, concerning suffering, etc., followed by several examples regarding the situation, the true situation of the soul during and after death. And so this evening, I thought it would be good to present one of the cases of a suicide that has given report back to Kardec during their mediumship meetings. And this case is entitled, you can look at it if you have the book, Heaven and Hell. It is entitled Mother and Son. And here's how it starts out. By the way, it's chapter 5. It's part 2, chapter 5 in Heaven and Hell book. This is a story of a young man who's 21 years old, and he's seriously ill. And he knows he's on his deathbed, so he calls for his mother to, hug her and say goodbye. And the mother makes a comment. She says, go ahead of me, for I won't be long following you. Well, the family hears her say this, but they think, it's condolences. They don't take it seriously. Well, lo and behold, they're unable to find her after his death, and they do find her. She had committed suicide. She hung herself. So these spirits were evoked at a Parisian Spiritist society during one of their mediumship meetings. And when they evoked the son, he says, I would be happy, but, I know of what happened to my mother. And so now I mourn. And, his heart was heavy. And he says, it was her refusal to resign herself to the will of God. and accepting the trial that was only but a temporary separation from him. And he goes on to say he wants to encourage other mothers that are maybe facing the same loss of a child. And he says, what you need to think about is Jesus and Calvary, Jesus on Calvary, and how, yes, he went through a lot of suffering, but then he rose to eternal glory. So it's quite a beautiful message that spirit delivers to mothers who have lost children. So then they evoke the mother. And very interesting, she is not in such a good place. She realizes she has discarnated, but she's demanding to see her son. And why isn't she seeing her son? And God isn't merciful. God isn't just, because God should understand her love for her son and how she herself, kind of grew him into a man. And she's demanding God's mercy. So the evoker, is counseling the spirit. And so he reminds her that they all sympathize with her grief, first and foremost. And I think that's a beautiful way to make a connection, right, with the suffering spirit. But they also tell her suicide is a crime in God's eyes, and that they remind her of the law of cause and effect, that this is the effect of this cause of committing suicide, ending her life, quitting her life, willfulness. And as a result, the consequence is she's unable to see her son. And they tell her, not only because of what she did, but how she's behaving now. She's blaspheming God, saying God is unjust and God doesn't understand and God doesn't love mothers. So they remind her that, if you want to attract God's mercy, this isn't the way. But they also let her know that her son is still very close to her, but as a part of her expiation, her suffering, that there's a veil and she will not be able to see him. And that they remind her too that this is all in her hands, and she just, just depending on her choices and her decisions, she can lessen the time that is that she's separated from her son. So they encourage her to pray. And I think what's so beautiful is not only do they encourage her, but they pray with her. And I wanted to read the prayer because it is really very beautiful. And they say to her, pray to God and say with me, dear God, forgive me for having doubted your justice and goodness. If you have punished me, I realize I have deserved it. Please accept my repentance and submission to your holy will. And then we see a change in the mother's attitude. She becomes very optimistic and she thanks the group for helping her. And she says, I will pray. And she says goodbye. And so it's very beautiful that they were actually able to help this spirit. So then we look to Kardec. We go into the gospel and we start reading what Kardec has codified under suicide and insanity. One of the things that he's clear to say is that each wrong has an effect according to the circumstances that accompany it. So he's saying there is no uniform punishment, that like if you commit suicide, this is what's going to happen. That each situation is looked at independently. And he reminds us that God is the judge, not us. We cannot determine, I want to be with my son, so I quit my life so I can be with my son. No, that is not up to us. So these are things that also are said in the Spirit's book. And again, I just remind you of those numbers, 943 to 957 in the Spirit's book. It's all those questions are addressed towards suicide and the answers that the high order spirits give us. Beautiful. So it's interesting. One of the things that is said is that discontentment is the cause of all suicides, no matter what the motive. And that we fall into this desperation when we don't see a way out, when we don't see that there can be a solution to our problem, our suffering, we fall into this desperation. But it's interesting because in the Spirit's book, they say, yes, discontentment, but what leads to this discontentment? It's very interesting. They spell it out very nicely for us. It is idleness, lack of faith, and satiety, which is very interesting. I thought satiety, it's interesting, someone being satiated, full, why would they want to quit their life? But we will see that that is oftentimes connected with pride and also this lack of responsibility, and that everyone else should work, but I should just get mailed a paycheck, that kind of attitude. So we can see those are the three main ingredients that lead people to this discontentment with life, and then therefore look to end the discontentment and they commit suicide. So also Kardec talks about this moral cowardice, and he says this comes up when we have doubt, disbelief, and when we have a materialistic viewpoint of life. And what does he mean by that? When we don't recognize that there's multiple lives, and when we are very attached to earthly materials or this incarnation, when we're very attached, because he says it almost provides the logic, like, this is it, this suffering. So if I end my life early, I don't have to suffer as much. And he says they are often attacked, many people in the world today, with this line of thinking, because it seems to make sense in their mind. So Kardec says we don't have to follow that logic, that we have the Spiritist doctrine that gives us another line of logic where we know there's certainty. There is no doubt. And we are called to patience, resignation, and calmness to not only develop these, but practice them. And as we do that, we develop moral courage, right? So the moral cowardice is the doubt, the disbelief, the material attachment, which develops moral cowardice. But as we practice patience, resignation, and calmness, they identified these three as primary, we develop moral courage. So again, they remind us that suicide is against the natural law, and that we also know that no suffering is eternal. We know that there is no burning fire forever, no hell forever, that suffering is not eternal. So he just points out some certainties that we develop with Spiritism. And the first one he says is that we know that happiness in our future life, afterlife, is equal to the amount of resignation we practice while on earth. He says that the effects of suicide are opposite to what a suicidal is hoping for, and that suicide actually accrues more debt. So if they're trying to escape something, they're actually just adding to their troubles. And suicide is an obstacle for reuniting with loved ones who have already passed on. And so we see this clearly in this story of this woman, that she was denied access to her son after she committed suicide, and that she was, in fact, in a way, developing more debt as she was blaspheming God and ranting and raving and being very indignant. Hi, Abby Shear. Thank you for signing in. So Kardec points out to us reasoning is a crucial factor in preventing and avoiding suicide. And, it's so beautiful because with Spiritism, we are always encouraged to continue educating ourselves. and John DeRosa saying Friday night's inspirational talk at Kardec Radio was about suicide, and the spirits had them read the same Heaven and Hell episode, Spirit Coherence. Well, thank you. I saw the post right before I was to sign on, and I thought, oh, geez, I should have really listened to that first. But there's no mistake, right? We know the spirits, when they want to deliver a message, they get it through. So thank you, John, for sharing that, and I will go back and listen to it. So we see that there's that reasoning, right? We can take the materialistic view and say, oh, I can end my suffering and quit my life, and think that's logical. Or we can learn more about Spiritism and get a bigger picture of the laws, the natural laws, also mainly cause and effect. And also we can learn about virtues and how we can build our moral courage to be firm, because we know the world is a place, it's a prison, it's a school, and it's a jail, and we are here to learn. So it's not a vacation, it's not warm and fuzzy, right? Okay. So it also, I think this is important to point out, that the spirits remind us that, okay, so people who commit suicide, they have something to face, an expiation, suffering. But we should also be aware that people who drive people to this act, now we may think we're innocent. Oh, we didn't do it. We didn't commit suicide. They did. But what were we doing? And also, so he's telling us, the spirits are telling us that not only are they guiltier, but they will also be tried. Well, it will be considered as a murder. So it's the same as killing somebody. Just that very act of causing so much disharmony in someone else's life, or, so we push them to the abyss. The other thing is, if we are able to help someone, if we're able to prevent a suicide and we don't, there again, we're guiltier. So those who push people into suicide by causing so much disharmony, or those who could have helped and prevented and they didn't, that they too will be, there will be a consequence for them as well. So I think this is a beautiful thing that Spiritism brings to us, that no material view is going to be telling us, letting us know about this. And this is things that we hear from the spirits themselves, okay, that have already passed on. So this is because of mediumship. I think another point that's very interesting is Kardec. So these questions in the Spirit's book that are addressed to suicide, Kardec asks many questions about various types of suicide. For example, euthanasia, moral, which is when we abuse our passions, so much so that we end our life earlier than we should have, alcoholism, drug abuse. The other thing that I think is interesting to point out is when people commit suicide because they don't want the shame, something they've done, and they don't want their family to have to suffer from the shame of it, they will commit suicide. And the spirits tell us, no, all those motives, all those situations, they are all suicides because they lack resignation and they lack submission to the will of God. So, and they also point out this thing about shame and people committing suicide in regards to society's viewpoints, society's opinions, society's slander or gossip. They say that when we as a collective, as humanity, gets rid of these social prejudices and abuses, this type of suicide will come to an end, because there just won't be any reason for it, not from a material viewpoint. So as we can see, this is a collective. So it's not about I committed suicide or she committed suicide or whatever. It's a collective issue. And so we need to progress as a collective and to address this. This is all of us, we all need to help with how we practice living our lives and put to good use these virtues that we are learning. Patience. What is patience? Patience is learning to wait because we know it's right and for love. It's not about enduring something, suffering through. No. It's about because we know it's right. It's a higher vibration type of patience. And resignation. And we all know what resignation is, right? It's consent of the heart. It's that we decide to obey and follow, and we consent through our heart because we know it is right. We know it is within our spirit, not because, oh, I don't want to get yelled at or I don't want to make a mistake, but because of what is in our heart. And then calmness. We can all do with a bit more calmness, right? Practicing calmness, especially in times that are trying and we're feeling low confidence, is to relax ourselves and be calm, take some deep breaths, and remember we are never alone. So I thought it would make sense today to end our program with a prayer. In the back of the gospel, there's a collection of prayers, and one of the prayers is a prayer for suicides. And I thought it would be very appropriate to end with that prayer today. I think lastly, I need to say that Joanna Giangelis reminds us in Happy Life that children are alone. So in particular to this case of suicide, that her son was not hers. Her son was on loan to her from God, and for her responsibility to educate this man, which it appears she did. So God bless her. So now we will settle ourselves and get ready for the prayer devoted to suicides. Oh God, we know the fate reserved for those who violate your laws by intentionally shortening their days, but we also know that your mercy is infinite. Deign to extend it over the soul of those who commit suicides. May our prayers and your commiseration soften the bitterness of their suffering and not having had the courage to await the end of their trials. Good spirits, whose mission is to assist unfortunates, take them under your watch care, inspire them with repentance for their wrong, and may your assistance give them the strength to more resignedly bear the new trials that they will have to endure to repair it. Keep from them evil spirits, who may once again lead them into evil and prolong their suffering by causing them to lose the fruit of their future trials. You, whose misfortune is the object of our prayers, may our commiseration soften your bitterness and awaken in you hope for a better future. That future is in your hands. Trust in the goodness of God, whose bosom is open to all those who repent, while remaining shut only to hardened hearts. And so be it. And so it is. Thank you, dear friends. I am so grateful to have been at this prayer session with you all. And I so look forward to seeing you again next week, same time, 6 p.m. Sunday evening. And of course, look in on all the other Kardec radio programs, because they are there to nourish our souls and help us to prevent getting into discontentment with life, either through idleness or satiety or a lack of faith. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening and a wonderful week. And let us all keep in our prayers those spirits who are still suffering. God bless them. Good night. See you next time.